session, Leveraging Risk Management Framework for CMMC Success. This will be presented by Mike Brooks. Mike is a retired U.S. Air Force Cyber Operations Officer and post-9/11 veteran who led and commanded cyber missions supporting national security and cyber terrorism. Mike has founded VetNet Cyber, a service-disabled veteran-owned small business, and is a CMMC Certified Assessor. Please welcome Mr. Mike Brooks.
Thank you, Mike. All right, welcome. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. I got to tell you, I'm really excited about B-Sides. You know, you go to conferences. I think I've been to 4 or 5 this year, and these local conferences, they're just different. There's just something about them. They're cooler. You know, the people are nicer, and you seem to get a lot out of them. So I really appreciate the work that B-Sides have done to pull this together. Mike, to you and your team, this has been great. All right, so this morning I want to talk to you guys about risk management framework and CMMC. So just what everybody wants to hear on a Saturday morning. Actually, with a show of hands here, who has heard of CMMC? Who's familiar with that? Okay, so just about everybody in the room. What about risk management framework or RMF? Okay, so again, just about everybody in the room. So what I want to do this morning is I want to connect those two and show you how they can be a powerful combination together. CMMC is actually maps pretty well to the CMMC requirements, and so I want to show you that. I work with defense vendors. That's primarily where I focus. I do some assessments, but again, I primarily do those to get the answers to the tests and share them so that we can get our vendors ready to pass their certifications. Again, who am I and why am I here? Mike kind of hit it. You know, I've been on both sides of this. I've been on the warfighter side. I've sat in the CISO seat. I've been a program manager. I've been an assessor. You know, and you know, through the military career that I had, and for those of you that have been in the military, you know, it's a mission focus, and so that's kind of what I bring to the CMMC ecosystem is a mission focus. So I did found a service-disabled veteran-owned small business about 2 years ago, focused primarily on CMMC readiness. I'm also pursuing some government contracts myself, so I have to have that accreditation as well. So I'm not only helping others implement CMMC, I'm implementing it for myself. So when we talk about risk management framework, and again, for those of you that are familiar with that framework, it's essentially what the Department of Defense uses and the government at large uses to accredit its information systems. Information system is a key word that we're going to come back to several times today because that is a fundamental component to how all of this works. You may have seen the acting DoD CIO recently has been very vocal about the risk management framework. She said, hey, I'm going to blow up the RMF. I'm blowing up ATOs. They're stupid. They're dumb. They're archaic. What she didn't say was we're going to stop doing risk management, we're going to stop accrediting systems, we're going to stop protecting our data. She's talking about the bureaucracy attached to the RMF. She's not talking about the process itself. And she's 100% right. And so when we look to apply RMF to the defense base, these are businesses. They do not have time for bloated bureaucracy. They do not have time for unnecessary steps. So that agile approach is extremely important to a profit-driven organization. Not the government, but a business that's supporting the government. And so when we look at the RMF, we've got to figure out how can we apply this in a way that gets to the outcome without going through all of this bureaucracy. And so that's a little bit of what I want to go into today. Anybody directly involved with supporting defense-based companies or working with defense-based companies? Let me can just show, okay, it's about half of you. So the defense industrial base, for those of you that don't know, is a sector of critical infrastructure for the United States government. I think we have 13 critical infrastructure sectors. The defense is a sector. There's debatable number of companies. Some will say 300,000-ish companies that support the DoD. The DoD created cybersecurity requirements for these vendors 7 years ago in the form of NIST 800-171. They worked with NIST to develop a tailored baseline for defense companies focused primarily on the confidentiality of what is called control unclassified information, or covered defense information. Those cybersecurity requirements were self-attestation. So when you submitted a bid for a contract, 2017, you just checked a box and said, yea, verily, we meet our DFAR 7012 compliance requirements. That was it. And then you went about your day, you went about your business, you executed your contract, and all was well. What the DoD found out was that a lot of the defense vendors didn't necessarily have the cybersecurity posture that was required. You could argue that they ignored the regulation. The other side of that coin is not really what they do, so maybe they didn't really understand the level of rigor that was required to implement those controls and all of the documentation that goes along with it. That was really the impetus behind CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification. It was to establish not only that baseline of what's acceptable across the defense base, but also to validate that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. So CMMC doesn't introduce new requirements. That's a key point. It just validates that you're doing what you're already supposed to be doing. A lot of organizations that I work with and speak to, probably have spoken to hundreds over the last several years. They all treat it like a checklist. Like, okay, just tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. Just what are the 5 things I need to do? And it is not that way. It is a program. It is a strategy. It is based on an information system. Again, we'll come back to that term a couple more times. And while CMMC tells you what to do, what's really missing is the approach, okay, so how do we structure all of this stuff so that we can deliver the outcomes that we need to, which is protecting the data and executing our contract responsibilities. And RMF really provides that how. It really provides a framework for how to do that. Without it, teams are reactive, they're misaligned, and I can tell you, again, from my experience from working with the defense vendors, the leadership disconnect is probably the biggest component to CMMC readiness that I see. Teams are starting to implement things at the tactical level. It lands on the IT director's desk, and that poor guy's got to figure out how to do it, implement 110 controls and 320 security objectives and create 400 pages of documentation, and nobody's really helping them and nobody wants to hear it because everybody's busy. So, that's where, again, RMF can really come into play. So when we look at a framework, and again, I want to provide the frame for the framework. You may be familiar with the triangle here. It comes out of the NIST documentation 839. But it's a great way to think about how do we approach an information security program and how do we build that inside of an organization. And so, again, as I said, folks typically start very tactical. They start implementing controls. That's where they start. They start with solutions, right? We got Zscaler, we got CrowdStrike. What they don't start with is the strategy. So it really needs to be a top-down, bottom-up approach. And so what I mean by that is when you start with the strategy, you can start to understand the governance component of it. This touches everybody in the business. This is not an IT program. This is going to touch all components of the business. You've got to understand who's doing what to who's responsible for what. That's the strategy. You've got to understand what right looks like. You've got to drive investment. You've got to do lots of things at a strategic level, at the organizational level, that a lot of organizations that I work with simply don't do. They don't start there. Next is your structure. You have to actually build a program. You have to have documentation. You have to have reporting. You have to have reviews. You have to have accountability. You have to have that in the middle layer, especially around that information system that's housing the sensitive data. Without that definition, you're implementing controls across a universe of unknowns. And so that's where the structure is critically important. And then once we have that, we can implement the solutions. And again, those solutions kind of feed back up to the top because it's what helps us meet the requirements. And again, it kind of puts everything in the right order. So it has to be done at the organizational level. It has to be done at the program level, and then it has to be done at the tactical level. So that's just a good framework that I like to use, especially when I'm talking to some of the senior leaders in the organization to kind of understand, okay, how do we frame this? How do we really need to approach this? So why RMF is the missing piece? Again, it's what the DoD uses to secure its own information systems. It's funny if you look at the risk management diagram there on the slide, it says CUI registry on it. It says NIST 853, which is 800-171 was derived from 853. It talks about all of the risk management functionality that needs to occur. And so again, this is why it's a good framework. And, you know, my mom always used to I would ask her, Mom, how do you make that food? And she would just always make it the way that she made it, the way that she liked it, right? And she couldn't really tell you why she made it that way. It's very similar here. DoD implemented CMMC, not even realizing they're using the RMF because that's what they know, that's what they do. And so they've implemented that CMMC requirement, and RMF is really the missing framework around it. It's a decision framework, it's not a document framework. So this is where the bureaucracy comes in. So it's about making the right decisions, going through a structured process to deliver outcomes rather than providing documentation or an evidence repository or different things like that. It's a 7-step process. Again, it's very structured. It provides a consistent output, and a lot of firms don't know it exists. In her last round of comments, the acting DoD CIO, Katie Arrington, actually said, as they redo the RMF, industry is going to have a vote on it. Industry is going to get to coordinate on it, which tells you that it's something that they want to use across the defense base. So that's why I think it's the missing piece. One of the key components in DFARS 7012, for those of you that are familiar with it, you know what it is. For those of you that aren't, that is what establishes a defense vendor's contractual requirements to do cybersecurity. I think it's the second sentence. It refers to something as a covered contractor information system, CCIS. So your contract with the DoD specifies they think you have a covered contractor information system. They think you actually have an information system. Most of the companies that I work with, they don't have a defined system. They're using technology. They're using Outlook for this. They're using Dropbox for this. They're using all of this random technology, but there's no structure. There's no information system that's defined. And that's a fundamental problem that we have to solve right away because, again, it's a mindset shift. So when we talk about information system, and again, this is a key term because when you sign a contract with the DoD, if you're a vendor, they think you have one of these. They think you have an information system. So you ought to know what it is, and you ought to know how they define it. So they define it as a discrete set of information resources organized for the collection, processing, maintenance, use, sharing, dissemination, or disposition of information. And so what you see there in the triangle is you see an authorization boundary. This is a key component of a CUI CMMC program. You have to have an authorization boundary. You see system elements in the middle of the authorization boundary. Those are any technologies that store, process, transmit, covered defense information, control, and classified information. So we have to start with a picture like this. We have to start with a conceptual framework so that we understand when they say covered contractor information system, what do they mean? Well, what they mean is this. And so whatever technologies you're using inside of your business, however you're implementing these requirements, it has to be implemented around this notion of an information system. So when we look at RMF and we look at the information system, this is really where you start to get a playbook and a game plan for how to attack, CMMC requirements. It helps align leadership, it defines roles, it clarifies scope, and it develops a strategy. Without it, you have no accountability and you have no ownership. The first thing that I typically see when I talk to folks is, and this pain point is my experience, but I run into it almost 100% of the time, there's a disconnect between leadership and the implementers. There's just a disconnect. It's like, we don't know. I was talking to a president of a manufacturing company yesterday. He said, I can't believe this is actually real. What do we need to do? His team's been working on this for, I think, 3 or 4 years. They've gone through SSPs, they've gone through assessments, they've hired outside help. There's still that disconnect inside of this company. When you use RMF, one of the benefits of using it is you get to define who the affirming official is. That's part of establishing the roles and responsibilities. So I tell them, tag that guy as it or gal, make sure they understand what role they're filling in this program and what those responsibilities are. There's also an annual requirement in CMMC to do what's called affirmation. So once you pass your CMMC and you get, oh, we're CMMC level 2 certified, that's awesome. Annually, you have to now go into the DoD supplier risk system and affirm an affirming official within your organization. Not your vendor, not your service provider, not your cloud service provider. Somebody inside of your organization has to go in and say, yea, verily, we still are good, we still are 110, we still have all of our controls implemented. That's somebody's job, that's somebody's role, that's somebody's responsibility. Without an RMF kind of mindset, you wouldn't have that, you wouldn't know who that person is and how those things get defined. I have a picture of Bill Belichick on the slide. I don't know for those of you that know him. He's got 6 Super Bowl rings with the Patriots. He's got 2 Super Bowl rings from the New York Giants as a defensive coordinator. He is a disciple of Nick Saban. They coached together a few times. Nick Saban has 7 national championships. So I think altogether that's about 15 championships. Their coaching philosophy is 3 words. Their core coaching philosophy is do your job. On every single play, you have a job to do. Just do your job. You just do your job. Everybody else will do their job, and everything else will take care of itself. If you don't know what your job is, if you don't know who's implementing access control, if you don't know who's managing the baselines, if you don't know who responds to the incident, if you don't know who the affirming official is, that's where you're going to start having problems and struggles. And again, so that's an area where CMMC can really help. What I want to do now is kind of walk through the steps. Again, I don't want to give you kind of a RMF 201, but I do want to kind of just, again, introduce the 7 steps and kind of talk about them in the context of CMMC. So step 1 is not implement controls, right? Step 1 is prepare. Step 1 is strategy. Again, this is a decision-making framework. So we have to identify who is the affirming official. Who is the information system security officer? You have a question? Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so you take that authorization boundary, and that becomes your assessment scope. So the boundary is where the CUI is stored, processed, and transmitted. That's the way that I use RMF and tailor it to a CMMC implementation is there's still a red box around everything that stores, processes, and transmits CUI. There's still a logical separation requirement for things inside of that red box, and there's still a physical separation requirement for things inside of that red box. You can call it an assessment scope. When I show up as a CMMC certified assessor, I'm looking for a boundary. I'm looking for a box, and I'm looking for those assets inside. That's good question, good point. So again, these are some of the things that you want to discuss and have these conversations so that you understand, okay, what do we mean when we say boundary? What do we mean when we say scope? What's in, what's out? You have to decide this up front. If you don't do that, then again, you're going to risk wasting time, wasting energy, and wasting resources. Step 2 is categorize. Okay, so we have to define. We're going to have a list of assets inside of the red box. We're going to have a list of assets outside of the red box. One of the issues that I feel with CMMC is it's very nuanced. Okay, they created asset categories. They created their own asset categories. You have CUI assets. You have security protection assets, you have contractor risk managed assets, you have specialized assets. These are CMMC unique. And so if I'm a mid-tier defense vendor and I make engine fan blades and I have an IT team of 1, maybe 2, and I have an MSP, I don't know what a contractor risk management asset is. I don't know what a specialized asset is. I'm trying to make engine fan blades. And so this, again, becomes a very important step as somebody's working through building a program to define what's in and what's out, because anything that gets categorized as a CUI asset is going to be inside of that red box, is subject to the 110 controls, is subject to the 320 objectives, and is subject to the full accreditation assessment, which essentially you could think of it as federally protected land. And so obviously we want that to be as small as possible. And so the categorize step is where you can do that. The select step is kind of been done for you. It's NIST 800-171. Now, I'll tell you, I do work with a lot of vendors and a lot of companies who have additional requirements, right? They have additional DFARS requirements. They might have some 853 requirements. So it's not just 800-171. For some it is. It's pretty cut and dry, pretty simple. For others, again, it's not necessarily just 800-171. They may run an ISO 27001 on some portion of their process. And so then we have to figure out, okay, how do we map control A6.4 to 3.1.14, and we kind of have to harmonize those. Another area of where select is important is this notion of control inheritance, right? So RMF identifies what they call common controls. Those are controls that you can inherit, whether that's from an external service provider or from a cloud service provider. This is where you hear a lot of folks use the term shared responsibility matrix, right? Because the implementation of the control may touch 3 or 4 different organizations before we can get that output of that evidence that the control's properly implemented. This is where we talk about that, and we understand that if we're using a FedRAMP solution, we want their SSP, we want their system security plan, we want their boundary diagram, we want to understand what does this cloud service provider do and what is our responsibility as the organization, because we're going to have some responsibility here. And so this is where a lot of that would happen. This is where we start to bring the system security plan to life, the SSP, which is a core document. If you're not familiar, if you don't have an SSP, you don't pass go, you don't get to continue, it is a go, no go. You must have a system security plan. It's the first question I ask when I work with companies. The answer is usually we don't really have that. We know we're supposed to have it, but we've got some files we can show you, and it doesn't really look like a system security plan. This is where we start to lay that in, understanding the control framework, understanding the inheritance, understanding the implementation. As we implement the controls, and the security professionals in the room will know this, it's people, process, and technology, right? It's not just a tool. We have to show evidence that the controls are implemented and they're working appropriately to protect the data. This is, if you're a defense vendor, this is for your customer. This is for your client. The one that you signed probably a million or multi-million-dollar contract with, right? They're requiring you to meet these requirements. And so we have to really work together on doing that, and implementation is not where we start. You can see we've done some strategy, we've looked at the boundary, we've selected the controls. Now we can start to implement the controls. Now we can start to talk about what are we using. I was talking to another company this past week. They're looking for an assessment. They've got an October deadline. Hey, we need to get CMMC. Our prime's banging on us. We've got to get this done. I said, okay, well, what have you done to date? They said, well, we got Zscaler. We got CrowdStrike. We got Okta. We got GCC High. They just listed off about 9 different tools and said, this is what we've done. We went out and we bought all these tools. And it's like, well, if you're in GCC High, can't you just use Entra ID? Can't you just use Sentinel? Have you guys considered using the native tools in GCC High? Like, well, we didn't know we could do that. I mean, so they've already invested, $1 million probably in tooling that they may not need because they started with implementation. The other key component of this is you have to kind of own the outcome here as a leader within a defense organization. Your service provider is not doing this for you. They will do portions of this for you, but they do not own the outcome. You inside of that defense organization, you own the outcome. You have to put your name on the line here. You have to annually, again, affirm that your posture is meeting all of the requirements. When I think of capabilities, I think of something that we're able to do, and that's a good way to think about implementation. It turns controls into capabilities. And what do I mean by that? I say when we can use the control family as a verb, we know we've implemented correctly, right? When we can control access, when we can manage configurations, when we can respond to incidents, that's how we know we actually have a capability. That's what our customer, the DoD, wants us to have. That's where the assurance comes in, not we racked a bunch of tools, we set a bunch of policy, and we're not really doing much after that. So implementation is a key step. RMF has an assess step in it, right? A continuous assessment. You have to do security assessment plans. If anybody's worked with FedRAMP, continuous monitoring is in there as well. You have to have a security assessment plan. It's a key document within an RMF framework. Well, guess what? Those two controls happen to make it into 800-171. There's a 311.1 is a risk assessment. You have to do an assessment. You have to do a risk assessment. 312.1 is controls assessment. You got to do a full controls assessment. I was talking to a company 2 weeks ago, and they were looking at doing a mock assessment. They said, hey, can you come and do a mock assessment for us? I said, well, sure, I can, absolutely. I said, did you do your security assessment, 3.12.1? How are you meeting that control? Because you should have already been doing an annual security assessment, right, or a periodic security assessment, right? What's 3.12.1? You know, so it's like it's already kind of built into the framework and the fabric of the baseline. I mean, it's in there for a reason. So again, assessment is a key step. This is where we can judge our output. We can start to understand where we have gaps. Things change. That's another thing. Things change all the time. We use different tools. We get different clients. We get different requirements. We need to share data with this person. So assess is where you can kind of really help calibrate that. Okay, so authorize in the DoD RMF world, I was an authorizing official, right? You sign off on the package. Somebody puts their name on the package that says, you have your approval to operate. You are good to go based on everything I'm reading, based on everything I'm seeing. In the CMMC model, your ATO is coming from your C3PAO, your Certified Third-Party Assessment Organization, via a CMMC Level 2 certification. That's essentially your, you could think of that as your ATO. That's the way that I think of it. And again, I'm giving you a mental model that I use. I'm not saying this is the way that you have to do it. I'm just, my background is in RMF. That's what I grew up with. That's what I learned. And I see it's very similar to CMMC, and I see a lot of value in thinking about it in those terms. But essentially, that's your ATO. When you get CMMC Level 2 certified, you know, that's your validation that you are meeting the requirements and you can effectively protect the control unclassified information. If you wouldn't sign your name to it, then you're probably not ready. And you know, when I was a lieutenant, I had to sign an accreditation package. They brought it to me. It had to be signed today. We got to get it up now. I signed it. I trusted them. You know, the next afternoon I was in my boss's office talking about the changes that weren't incorporated in the signed package that I had just signed. So learned a valuable lesson. Right before you put your name on something, you got to really make sure that you can validate it. The last step in the RMF here is monitor. And again, we kind of already talked a little bit about this. This is staying vigilant, staying ready. Many of the organizations that I work with, if not all, I would say 95 to 99.9% don't have any sort of reporting on how they're doing. No executive reporting. They're implementing a program. People are working on the program. They're implementing tooling, but there's not a monthly review. There's not an executive quarterly review. There's not a business review. There's no real reporting going on within the organization, which is a huge gap, and that's an output of continuous monitoring. And so again, if I'm the affirming official, if I'm the person that has to sign my name on that line and enter into the DoD database that we are still good, I don't want it to be 11 months and 29 days before I see you. I want to know, hey, how we doing this quarter? How we doing next quarter? How we doing this quarter? So that we can really build that cadence. This is how you stay ready. This is where the compliance mindset really moves into readiness. And again, as a defense vendor, as military folks, readiness is a concept. That's a mission concept. We have got to be ready. And we know we're ready because we've tested and we've measured and we've reported. So, you know, to kind of round all this out, again, I would say I use the RMF. It's proven useful for me. I like the framing of it. I think the DoD has knowingly or unknowingly leveraged it because it's the language that they speak. It's what they do on their own systems. And again, when you see things like covered contractor information system in the DFARS language, and you go inside a company and you say, "Show me your information system." What is that? What do you mean by that? It's that those types of disconnects are fundamental for alignment, and culturally, there's just a huge difference. And so I think by working with the vendors, using something that's culturally accepted within the DoD, the model that they themselves use, it really helps to kind of understand and put things in the right perspective, and then follow the same framework and tailor it. Use whatever value you can get out of it to maximize kind of the impact of it, to help the defense vendors build information security programs, which costs money and is not something they do unless they absolutely have to, right? And define the scope of their information systems and narrow that down as much as possible, so we truly do reduce the exposure to this sensitive data. When you support the U.S. military as your customer, you inherit their adversaries, right? Their adversaries are nation-state cyber threat actors, right? They have teams of people who dissect our supply chain and who get assigned, hey, you're going to work on defense. Hey, you're going to work on small manufacturing. Hey, here's your portfolio of 50 companies. Find a way in. Hey, this is the new F-38 program that the DoD is doing. This is the list of vendors. Find a way in. That's what they're doing. And so it becomes much more than, oh my God, we got to meet our CMMC requirements. Oh my gosh, we got to build an information security program. Oh God, we need a system security plan. And so, again, that's kind of the bottom line for me, and what I try to remember when I'm working with these companies. And the other thing is I try to be a little bit empathetic, because again, it's not really what they do. This is not their area of expertise, and so sometimes just helping them make smart decisions around who can I partner with, what's a good vendor look like, what should this look like, what does right look like, can we just have a conversation around this? That's all in that prepare space. Right, which is all very good conversations to have. I have a guide here that I've written specifically for business leaders. I think I'll share the slides, and so that guide will be available. It's got some checklists in it. It breaks down the steps. It's got some leadership takeaways. I just wanted to create a resource, again, to share with leaders to help them make better decisions around this stuff, rather than continue to pretend it doesn't exist, and we get into 7 more years down the road here. So that's why that's there. But yeah, so that's my talk. That's my presentation. I really appreciate it. I'd love to entertain any questions. I know this is a hot topic, so we can go anywhere with CMMC. I think there's actually a CMMC presentation after this as well. So we got Pete back there. He can weigh in on help me out if I get stuck on anything. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Both, yes. Typically what is continuous monitoring in the compliance world is I need an evidence artifact to validate the output of the control that I can file away and show an assessor when they come. That could be an operational output, right? It could be something within tolerance. We've got to be able to detect within these parameters, and this evidence shows that we're doing that. Like we're remediating within 14 days. We've remediated within 7 days. Some of the controls are administrative. This slide does a good job. Our friends at Compliance Forge, this slide does a good job of, and it's a little hard to see, but the coloring basically tells you what's an administrative control, what's a technical control, what's a physical control. And so some of it is just administrative. Did we do a review at our prescribed time? That will be documented in the system security plan in the SSP. And this is a key gap that you see a lot in these assessments is, say what you do, we review this log monthly, then do what you say. It's like, okay, hey, you say you've reviewed it monthly. Do you got any evidence that you reviewed your logs monthly? do we review them monthly? I thought it was quarterly. And then this conversation happens about like, well, nobody knows that you're even supposed to be doing it monthly. It's in your SSP. And so that continuous monitoring helps alleviate some of that. No, did I answer your question? Uh-huh. Those are organizationally defined parameters, so you get to establish those if it's not prescribed. In the current baseline, a lot of those are left to you as risk decisions. They're not prescribed. If there is a prescribed time, it will be in the standard. The new revision, revision 3, which is going to be implemented soon, actually has a lot more organizationally defined parameters because the DoD has essentially tightened their risk tolerance on some of those things. So they said, instead of you tell me how often you review the logs, it's organizationally defined. It's like we want you to review the logs at least annually, as an example. I don't know if that's the real one, but there's a series of those coming. Yep, you're talking about Rev 3, the ODPs? Yep. But again, that's where the continuous monitoring really comes into play. It also helps drive investment decision too, which is an area that the business leaders like to hear that. It's like, okay, hey, you're paying for stuff you don't really need, or hey, you need to get a better tool or a better provider. Yes, sir. Here, sir, in the front row. Did you have a question? Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, that's an excellent point. The data flow is critical here, and two things that you mentioned, flow down is absolutely important. That's in the D47012 clause too. Good question to ask is, do we need to flow this down? Can we do the library approach where they come in and they just view it in our environment, they don't get to take the book home? Like, if you can do it that way, then there's no flow down required. The other tool that I use to do the data flow analysis is user stories, right? Because the business partners, they don't understand. I don't know. It's like, do you use CUI? Then what do you do with it? Where do you, and this is an open, my daughter, we have a safe zone, right? This is safe zone. You can tell me anything. Like, what do you do with it? Where does it go? Okay, and then what, and then what, and then what? And then you understand, it's like, okay, now we can really start to do something with that because we've understood it, right? And we can say, oh, do you have to send it to Tom? Does he really need it? Can you just give him conditional access? And that's how you can narrow the scope. Yeah, Mike, go ahead. Right, yeah, they skip right over it. Skip right over it. Yeah, this is where we, and I tell the IT, normally I work with IT directors because I typically work with companies that are large enough to have big DoD contracts. that have small IT teams. They probably need a CISO, but they don't have one. Right? That's kind of the sweet spot of the company that I work with. And they're so busy. Those people are so busy implementing. This is more of a business strategy conversation. And so it's like I try to tell them, let's lead up here and really frame this more as a strategy conversation, as an investment conversation, rather than an implementation conversation. Yeah, it's a workshop. I mean, just something to kind of get people aligned. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great approach, personally. The pitfall that I see there is thinking that it's a completely outsourced deal. So in other words, I'm working with a vendor, I'm working with a provider, they got my CMMC, they're doing CMMC for me, they're going to tap me on the shoulder and tell me what to say at the assessment, but without realizing that I myself, internally, there's some controls that they can't even help me with, I have to implement, and I have the ultimate ownership and accountability, right? The handshake is between me and the DoD, it's not between my vendor. So that's a great solution. It can get people spun up pretty quickly. A lot of those are getting proven. A lot of them are getting CMMC certified. The enclave approach is really, really good. But again, I just caution folks to understand, and I typically work independent with the vendor. I don't sell service, I don't sell product, I don't work for, I have a small company, I work directly with the vendors and more of an advisory role. And I always tell them, you've got to make sure you understand your responsibilities, what you're accountable for. Yeah. Yes, sir. Awesome. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That works. The other part of it that works, when you start talking about manufacturing, is really understanding specialized assets and flow down and CUI flavor. Like, is this actually CUI? People, again, the defense vendors, I tell you, you don't have to be a CUI expert. If it's not spelled out in your contract that it's CUI and it's not clear in the registry that it's CUI, if you have a question, go back to your contracting government lead and ask them. But if we know for sure that we're going to have CUI on the floor, right, then we've got to understand, okay, what systems are those flowing into? And then, again, because those are going to now be in scope. So, yeah, that's a critical point, especially around manufacturing, because that's what a lot of this is manufacturing. It's not office work. The consulting companies, I think, are not going to grow very much. I think it's going to happen more on the manufacturing space. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, cloud, is there, but that's not the only answer, right? It doesn't have to be cloud. It can be on-prem. Yep, exactly. Good point. Again, our friends at Compliance Forge have put together a great chart here. The light blue is technical controls. The orange is administrative controls. So you can see typically the technical controls are around access, auditing, identity, and then the network SC domain. I think that's all the time we have. I'll stick around. I'd love to talk more about it. And again, I think, like I said, we've got another CMMC session coming up after this one. Thank you guys so much. Enjoy the conference.